The paralyzed billionaire CEO laughed when the maid's 7-year-old daughter frantically signed, "That's not your medicine." But his laughter died the moment she handed him a medical prescription that would change everything forever. If this story touches your heart, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world and helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. The crystal chandelier above the mahogany staircase caught the afternoon light, scattering rainbow fragments across walls that had witnessed better days. Alexander Mercer, 35 years old and once the most powerful tech CEO on the East Coast, sat motionless in his wheelchair at the center of his Connecticut mansion's grand foyer. His tailored suit hung differently now, still expensive, still perfectly pressed, but unable to hide the weight loss and the way his shoulders curved inward like a man trying to disappear into himself. "Mr. Mercer, it's time for your afternoon medication," announced Nurse Patricia, her voice professionally cheerful as she approached with a small paper cup containing 2 pills and a glass of water. Alexander's jaw tightened. 6 months since the car accident. 6 months since his spine was crushed and his empire began crumbling. 6 months of nurses, physical therapists, and pitying looks from people who used to fear him. A movement caught his eye, small, urgent, desperate. Emma Rodriguez, the 6-year-old daughter of his housekeeper Maria, stood near the kitchen doorway. Her tiny hands moved frantically in the air, forming shapes and gestures that meant nothing to him. Her dark eyes, too large for her heart-shaped face, were wide with what looked like terror. "What is that child doing?" Alexander's voice carried the sharp edge that had once silenced boardrooms. "Maria, control your daughter." Emma's hands moved faster, more desperately. She pointed at the pills, then made an X with her small arms. She shook her head violently, her long black hair swinging. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. It never did. The child had been born without the ability to speak, a fact that Alexander had always found convenient. Silent children didn't interrupt important phone calls. "She's just being dramatic, Mr. Mercer," Nurse Patricia said dismissively. Children her age often act out for attention. But Emma didn't stop. She ran forward, this tiny figure in a faded pink dress that was probably 2 sizes too small, and grabbed Alexander's arm. Her touch was gentle but insistent. She pointed at the pills again, then made slashing motions across her throat. Then she did something that made even the cold-hearted CEO pause. Tears began streaming down her cheeks as she looked up at him with such desperate pleading that something ancient and forgotten stirred in his chest. "Get her away from me," Alexander commanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Maria rushed in from the kitchen, her cleaning gloves still dripping soapy water. "Emma, lo siento, Mr. Mercer. I'm so sorry. Emma, ven aquí ahora." She grabbed her daughter's hand, but Emma broke free and ran toward the hallway. "Your child is disrupting my household, Maria," Alexander said coldly. "If you cannot control her, perhaps you should find employment elsewhere." Maria's face went pale. At 42 years old, she had worked for the Mercer family for 8 years. She needed this job desperately, especially now, with her own health failing and medical bills mounting. "Please, sir, it won't happen again." "She's a good girl, just what? Just rude, just undisciplined?" Alexander's eyes were ice. "Take your medication break, Maria, and keep that child out of my sight." Maria nodded, her eyes downcast, and hurried after Emma. But as she left, Alexander saw Emma peek around the corner one more time. The little girl pressed her small hands together as if praying, then pointed at the pills again and shook her head with such conviction that something in Alexander's hardened heart cracked, just a millimeter, but enough to make him pause. "Mr. Mercer?" Nurse Patricia held out the pills again. "Shall we proceed?" Alexander stared at the small white pills in the paper cup. They looked identical to the ones he'd been taking for months. Nothing different, nothing wrong. And yet, "Leave them on the table," he said abruptly. I'll take them after my phone call with the board. Nurse Patricia frowned slightly, but placed the cup on the marble side table. Don't forget, Mr. Mercer, the doctor was very specific about timing. As the nurse left, Alexander sat alone in his vast foyer, surrounded by wealth that now felt like a prison. Through the window he could see Maria kneeling in the garden, holding Emma close. The little girl's shoulders shook with sobs, and Maria's hands, Alexander noticed for the first time, were moving in the same way Emma's had been, sign language. They were having a conversation in sign language. His phone buzzed. Another message from his assistant about declining stock prices. Another reminder that his company was slipping away while he sat here, trapped in this useless body. Alexander reached for the pills, ready to wash them down and return to the numbness that was his new normal. But his hand stopped halfway. Emma's face flashed in his mind, those desperate, terrified eyes, that urgent X she'd made with her small arms. The way she'd touched her throat as if warning him of death itself. Ridiculous, he muttered to himself, a mute child who knows nothing about medicine. Yet his hand didn't move toward the pills. Instead, he wheeled himself closer to the window, watching as Maria finally convinced Emma to go inside. As they passed below his window, Emma looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and in that moment, Alexander saw something that shook him to his core. Not childish drama, not attention-seeking behavior, but genuine, mature concern. This 6-year-old was trying to save his life, and he had mocked her for it. The pills sat on the marble table, waiting, white and innocent and possibly, just possibly, deadly. Alexander stared at them as afternoon shadows grew longer across his mansion floor. For the first time in 6 months, he felt something other than self-pity and rage. He felt curiosity, and beneath that, something even more dangerous, doubt. What did Emma know that he didn't? The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn sunshine that made Alexander's mansion look like something from a magazine, all glass and granite, designed to impress rather than comfort. Alexander had barely slept, his mind churning with questions about the previous day. The untouched pills still sat on the marble table where he'd left them, a small rebellion against routine that felt both foolish and necessary. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer." Nurse Patricia breezed in with her usual forced cheerfulness, carrying a breakfast tray. "I see you forgot your medication yesterday. That's not good for your recovery. Let me get you fresh ones." "Wait." Alexander's voice stopped her mid-step. "I want to see the prescription bottle." Nurse Patricia's smile flickered, just for a moment. "Mr. Mercer, you've seen it dozens of times. It's the same medication you've been taking for months. Then it won't be a problem to show me again." Something in his tone, that old CEO authority coming back to life, made her comply. She retrieved the orange prescription bottle from her medical bag and handed it to him. Alexander read the label carefully. Oxycodone, 80 mg, prescribed by Dr. Harrison Chen. Take twice daily for pain management. Everything looked correct. "Satisfied?" Nurse Patricia asked, her smile tighter now. Before Alexander could respond, a soft knock came at the study door. Maria entered, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. She'd been crying. Alexander could see that much. Behind her, partially hidden, stood Emma. The little girl clutched a wrinkled piece of paper to her chest. "Mr. Mercer, I apologize for interrupting," Maria said quietly, her English careful and precise despite her accent. "But Emma, she won't eat, won't sleep. She keeps saying—" Maria paused, her hands moving as she translated her daughter's signs. "She keeps saying you're in danger." "This is absurd," Nurse Patricia interjected. "The child is clearly troubled and needs—" "Let her speak," Alexander said, his eyes fixed on Emma. The little girl was trembling, but there was a determination in her small face that reminded him of himself, back when he still believed he could change the world. Emma stepped forward, her movements hesitant but purposeful. She held out the wrinkled paper with both hands. like a sacred offering. Alexander took it, and his blood ran cold. It was a prescription, old, partially faded, but still legible. The handwriting was different from what he'd seen on his current bottle. The dosage was different too. Oxycodone, 40 milligrams, not 80 milligrams. But what made Alexander's heart race was the doctor's name, Dr. Harrison Chen, and the date, 2 weeks after his accident. "Where did you get this?" Alexander demanded, his voice sharp with sudden fear. Emma's hands moved rapidly. Maria translated, her voice breaking. "She found it in the trash 3 days ago. She was helping me clean the nurse's bathroom. She remembered it because—" Maria's hands trembled as she continued signing and speaking. "Because her father died from wrong medication in Mexico before we came here." The room went silent. Even Nurse Patricia seemed caught off guard. "That's ridiculous," the nurse finally said, but her voice had lost its professional warmth. "That prescription is outdated. Mr. Mercer's dosage was increased months ago. His tolerance required it." "Show me the documentation," Alexander said coldly. "Show me Dr. Chen's notes increasing my dosage. I don't carry all the files with me. They're with the medical service. Call them, now." While Nurse Patricia fumbled with her phone, Alexander studied the old prescription in his hands. The paper was worn, as if Emma had been carrying it everywhere, trying to find the right moment to show him. He looked at the little girl, really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't just Maria's daughter, some background noise in his house. She was a person, a small, terrified person who had been screaming a warning in the only language she knew, and he had been too arrogant and self-absorbed to listen. "Emma," he said softly, and the girl's eyes widened at hearing her name spoken without anger. "Can you show me the difference?" Emma nodded eagerly. She pointed at the old prescription, 40 mg, and held up 4 fingers. Then she pointed at the current bottle in Nurse Patricia's bag, 80 mg, and held up 8 fingers. With her hands, she made a gesture of something growing bigger, then pointed at Alexander's heart and shook her head violently. "Too much? Too dangerous? Mr. Mercer, this is highly irregular," Nurse Patricia said, pocketing her phone. "The medical service will send the files by end of day, but I assure you everything is in order. This child is causing unnecessary panic over—" "Get out!" "Excuse me. Get out of my house. You're fired." Nurse Patricia's face flushed red. "You can't fire me without cause. I'll sue for wrongful termination. The cause is attempted negligence at best, possibly something worse. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out and call the police." For a moment, Nurse Patricia looked like she might argue further. But something in Alexander's eyes, that old dangerous gleam that had built a billion-dollar empire, made her think better of it. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, her footsteps echoing through the mansion like gunshots. When the door slammed, Alexander turned back to Emma and Maria. The little girl was crying again, but this time with relief. Maria knelt beside her daughter, her own tears flowing freely. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly. "Emma, you tried to tell me. You tried so hard, and I'm sorry I didn't listen." Maria translated with her hands, and Emma's face transformed. The fear melted away, replaced by something beautiful. Hope. She signed rapidly, and Maria laughed through her tears. She says you're welcome, and she's glad you're going to be okay." Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. All the armor he'd built around his heart over the years, all the coldness he'd cultivated to survive in the business world. This 6-year-old child, unable to speak a single word, had saved his life through pure determination and compassion. She had seen him as a human being worth saving when he'd seen himself as nothing but a broken shell. "Maria," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "tell me about Emma's father, about what happened." Maria's face clouded with old grief. "Miguel, my husband, he was a good man, Mr. Mercer. He worked construction in Puebla. He hurt his back, and a doctor, a bad doctor, gave him wrong medication, Too strong. Miguel's heart, it couldn't take it. He died in the hospital 3 years ago. Emma was only 3. She watched him suffer. Alexander closed his eyes. The little girl had witnessed her father's death from medication errors, and still she'd found the courage to warn a stranger, a man who had treated her and her mother with nothing but contempt. "I need to call Dr. Chen directly. Find out what's really in these pills." "Mr. Mercer," Maria said hesitantly, "there's something else. Something Emma wants to show you, something she found in the nurse's room." Emma nodded and ran from the study. She returned moments later carrying a small notebook, the kind nurses use to track patient information. She handed it to Alexander with both hands, pointing urgently at specific pages. Alexander opened the notebook, and his blood turned to ice. There, in Nurse Patricia's handwriting, were dosage records, but they didn't match what she'd been telling him. The prescriptions showed 40 mean, consistent with the old script Emma had found. But Patricia's notes indicated she'd been giving him double, 80 millimine, from her own supply. The implications were staggering. For months, Patricia had been overdosing him, potentially trying to. "Mother of God," Alexander whispered. "She was trying to kill me, slowly, make it look like an accidental overdose." Maria gasped, pulling Emma close. "The little girl signed something urgently," Emma asks. "Why would someone do this?" Alexander's mind raced through possibilities. Insurance fraud, a payoff from competitors, or perhaps, and this thought chilled him most, she was working for someone in his own company who wanted him permanently out of the picture. Someone who stood to gain from his death. His phone buzzed, a message from his head of security. "Sir, just reviewed security footage you requested. Nurse Patricia met with Marcus Thornton in parking garage last week. They appeared to know each other well. Marcus Thornton, his former COO, the man Alexander had fired 3 months ago for embezzlement. The man who swore revenge." Everything clicked into place like a puzzle solving itself. Patricia hadn't been acting alone. This was bigger than a rogue nurse. It was a conspiracy to eliminate him and probably seize control of his company while he was incapacitated. And if it hadn't been for a mute 6-year-old with a tragic past and a heart full of courage, the plan would have worked. Alexander looked at Emma. Really looked at her. This tiny girl in her too small dress had saved not just his life, but potentially his entire legacy. She had seen evil and chosen to fight it with nothing but silent warnings and desperate gestures. She was, in every way that mattered, a hero. "Emma," he said gently, and waited for Maria to position herself where Emma could see both of them. "You saved my life. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Thank you." Maria signed his words, and Emma's face lit up with joy so pure it hurt to witness. She signed something back, quickly and emphatically. "She says," Maria translated, her voice thick with emotion, "she says everyone deserves to be saved, even grumpy men in wheelchairs who don't listen to little girls." Despite everything, the fear, the betrayal, the near-death experience, Alexander laughed. It was the first genuine laugh he'd had in 6 months, and it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. But even as relief washed over him, new questions crowded in. How deep did this conspiracy go? Who else in his organization was involved? And most importantly, how could he protect his company and himself when he could barely protect himself? The answers would have to wait. First, he needed to call Dr. Chen, then the police, then his lawyer. But before all of that, he did something he hadn't done since the accident, something the old Alexander Mercer never would have done. He reached out and took Emma's small hand in his. "Thank you," he said again. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Emma squeezed his hand gently, and in that moment, Alexander understood something profound. Strength didn't come from wealth or power, or even the ability to walk. True strength came from compassion, from courage in the face of fear, from refusing to be silent when someone needed help, even if you had no voice to speak with. The little girl had taught him more in 2 days than he'd learned in 35 years of ruthless ambition. And as morning light streamed through the windows of his mansion, Alexander Mercer made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. But first, he had a conspiracy to unravel, and this time he had an unlikely ally by his side. Dr. Harrison Chen arrived at the mansion within 2 hours of Alexander's urgent call, his medical bag in hand and concern etched across his weathered face. He was 63, had been Alexander's physician for over a decade, and had never seen his patient look quite so intense or quite so alive since the accident. "Alexander, your message was alarming," Dr. Chen said as he settled into the leather chair across from the wheelchair. "You mentioned possible medication tampering." Alexander handed him both prescriptions, the old one Emma had found and the current bottle Patricia had been using. "Tell me the truth, Harrison. What was my prescribed dosage?" "Doctor." Chen examined both documents carefully, his frown deepening. 40 milligrams twice daily. I never increased it to 80. In fact, I specifically kept it at 40 because of your liver function tests." He looked up sharply. "How long have you been taking double doses?" "According to the nurse's records, at least 3 months." 3 months? Dr. Chen's face paled. "Alexander, at that dosage combined with your other medications, you could have suffered liver failure, respiratory depression, or cardiac arrest. The fact that you're still alive is nothing short of miraculous." Maria, who had been standing quietly with Emma near the door, translated for her daughter. Emma's hands moved rapidly, and Maria's eyes widened. "What is she saying?" Alexander asked. She says that's why you look so sick, grey skin, sleeping all the time. She thought you were dying like her papa." Dr. Chen knelt down to Emma's level, his eyes kind. "Young lady, you may have saved this man's life. How did you know something was wrong?" Emma's hands moved again, telling her story through gestures that Dr. Chen couldn't understand but could feel the urgency of. Maria translated, "She watched her father die from wrong medicine. She remembered his symptoms, the tiredness, the confusion, the way his skin looked when she saw Mr. Mercer getting worse the same way, she knew. She tried to tell him, but I wouldn't listen." Alexander finished quietly. "I was too proud, too angry at the world to pay attention to a child." Dr. Chen straightened and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police and the medical board. This is criminal negligence at minimum, possibly attempted murder. We need to secure Patricia's records, get a full toxicology screen on you, and—" "There's more," Alexander interrupted. "Security footage shows Patricia meeting with Marcus Thornton, my former COO. Dr. Chen's expression turned grim. "The embezzlement scandal. I remember. Alexander, if Thornton is involved, this goes beyond a rogue nurse. This is corporate sabotage, possibly a takeover attempt." "I know, which is why I need your help with something else." Alexander turned his wheelchair to face Emma directly. "Maria, ask Emma if she remembers anything else about Patricia. Anything unusual she might have seen or heard." Emma thought for a moment, then began signing animatedly. Maria's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, then alarm. "She says Patricia had many phone calls, always in English, but Emma learned to read lips a little. She has to communicate. She saw Patricia say, 'He'll be gone soon,' and the transfer papers are ready." "Transfer papers," Alexander breathed. "They weren't just trying to kill me. They were planning to transfer my company holdings while I was incapacitated or dead." Dr. Chen shook his head in disbelief. "But you'd need signatures, witnesses, legal approval." "Unless someone forged power of attorney documents during a time when I was heavily medicated and barely conscious." Alexander's mind was racing now, that old strategic brilliance coming back online after months of fog. Harrison, check your records. Were there any days when I was particularly sedated? Days when I might have signed documents without really understanding what I was doing? Dr. Chen pulled out his tablet, scrolling through digital files. There were several instances. Yes, here. 4 weeks ago, Patricia called me saying you were in severe pain and needed emergency sedation. I authorized a one-time increased dose to help you sleep. The next day, she called again with the same story. And during those days, Marcus Thornton visited me, Alexander said, the pieces falling into place. I remember now. Barely. He came with papers, said they were medical consent forms. I was so out of it, I just signed them. We need those documents, Dr. Chen said urgently. If they're forgeries or were signed under duress, Emma tugged on Alexander's sleeve. When he looked down, she was holding up her mother's phone, pointing at something on the screen. Maria took the phone, her eyes widening. Mr. Mercer. Emma took photos. She didn't understand what they were, but she knew they were important. She used my phone when I wasn't looking. Alexander took the phone, and his breath caught. Emma had photographed documents, transfer papers, power of attorney forms, all with his signature. But more than that, she'd captured Patricia's notebook, showing the medication fraud in detail. In the margins were notes, subject increasingly compliant and ready for final transfer by month end. This child, Dr. Chen said softly, is extraordinary. Alexander felt his throat tighten. This 6-year-old, unable to speak a word, had conducted an investigation that would have impressed trained detectives. She'd gathered evidence, made connections, and persevered even when the adult she was trying to help dismissed her completely. Emma, Alexander said, making sure she could see his face clearly. You're not just brave, you're brilliant. Maria translated, and Emma's cheeks flushed pink. She signed something quickly. She says she learned from watching TV detective shows with me, Maria explained with a tearful smile. She couldn't understand all the words, but she understood that bad people leave clues, so she looked for clues. The doorbell rang, making everyone jump. Maria went to answer it, returning moments later with 2 police detectives and Alexander's lawyer, Richard Morrison, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who had been Alexander's legal counsel for 15 years. Someone want to tell me why I'm being summoned for an emergency on a Saturday? Richard asked, then stopped when he saw the documents spread across Alexander's desk. What am I looking at? Attempted murder and corporate fraud, Alexander said calmly. And we have evidence, thanks to the bravest detective in Connecticut. He gestured to Emma, who stood partially hidden behind her mother's legs. The detectives exchanged confused glances. A child. The older detective, a woman named Sarah Martinez, said skeptically. A child who saved my life and uncovered a conspiracy, Alexander corrected. Detective Martinez, meet Emma Rodriguez. She's 6 years old, she's mute, and she's smarter than half my executive team. Over the next 2 hours, Alexander, Dr. Chen, and Maria explained everything. Emma's photos were documented. The prescriptions were logged as evidence. The detectives took notes on Thornton's connection to Patricia and promised to bring both in for questioning immediately. Mr. Mercer, Detective Martinez said as they prepared to leave, you're lucky to be alive. If this little girl hadn't been so persistent. I know, Alexander said quietly. Believe me, I know. When the police left, Richard stayed behind. Alexander, we need to secure your company immediately. If Thornton has forged documents, he might try to use them before he's arrested. I'll file emergency injunctions tonight, freeze all transfers, and alert the board. Do it. And Richard, I want you to draw up new papers, scholarship fund papers. Scholarship fund? Alexander looked at Emma, who was sitting on the floor near his wheelchair, drawing pictures with crayons Maria had found in the kitchen. For Emma's education, full ride from elementary through university. Whatever she wants to study, wherever she wants to go. She's got a gift for observation and problem solving. I want to make sure she has every opportunity to develop it." Maria gasped. "Mr. Mercer, we couldn't—" "You can and you will," Alexander said firmly, but his voice was gentle. "Maria, your daughter saved my life. She did something that trained security professionals, corporate lawyers, and medical staff all missed. The least I can do is ensure she has the future she deserves. There's more," he continued, turning back to Richard. "Medical fund for Maria, full coverage, best doctors, whatever condition she's been hiding from me." Maria's hands flew to her mouth. "How did you—" "Emma's been worried about you. I see it in how she looks at you when you think no one's watching. You're sick, aren't you?" Maria nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Lupus. I've been managing it with cheap medications, but not anymore. Best treatment, best doctors, starting Monday. And Maria, you're not my housekeeper anymore. You're my house manager. Triple salary, full benefits, and living quarters in the East Wing for you and Emma." I don't know what to say," Maria whispered. "Say yes," Alexander replied simply. "You've been working for me for 8 years, and I never really saw you. Never saw what you were dealing with, never saw how hard you worked, never noticed that your daughter is extraordinary. I was blind, Maria, to a lot of things. I'd like a chance to do better." Emma looked up from her drawing and signed something. Maria laughed through her tears, translating, "She says you're not so grumpy anymore." "Tell her she's right," Alexander said with a smile, "and tell her I'm sorry for not listening, for being cruel, for treating both of you like you were invisible." Maria signed his words, and Emma stood up. She walked over to Alexander's wheelchair and, without hesitation, wrapped her small arms around his neck in a hug. It was so unexpected, so pure, that Alexander felt his own eyes burn with tears. He thought he'd forgotten how to cry. When Emma pulled back, she signed something elaborate, her small hands moving with intensity. "She says," Maria translated, her voice breaking, "she says everyone makes mistakes. What matters is fixing them. She says you're fixing yours, so you're a good person now, she says. She says she's proud of you." A 6-year-old child, proud of him. When was the last time anyone had said those words to Alexander Mercer? When was the last time he'd done anything worthy of pride? Richard cleared his throat, clearly moved. "I'll get started on those papers immediately. Scholarship fund, medical coverage, employment contracts, all of it." As the lawyer left, Dr. Chen packed up his medical bag. "I'll schedule a full workup for Monday, Alexander. We need to assess any damage from the overdosing and adjust your legitimate pain management. But I have to say, you look better now than you have in months. More alert, more alive." "I feel alive," Alexander admitted, for the first time since the accident. After everyone left, it was just Alexander, Maria, and Emma in the grand foyer, where this had all begun just 2 days earlier. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything gold, and Alexander thought about how different this moment felt from that terrible scene when he dismissed Emma's warnings. "Maria, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mr. Mercer. How did you teach Emma sign language?" "I imagine resources for that aren't easy to find." Maria smiled sadly. "I learned when I was young. My mother, Emma's grandmother, was deaf. When Emma was born unable to speak, I knew immediately what to do. It was like my mother's legacy, giving my daughter a voice. My mother died before Emma was born, but in a way she's here, helping Emma communicate." "And your husband, how did he learn?" "Miguel learned for me, for my mother. He was a good man, Mr. Mercer. He would have loved to see Emma today, being so brave. He would have been proud." Emma tugged her mother's sleeve and signed something with a question on her face. "She asks if you have family," Maria translated. "She says your house is very big, but very empty." Alexander felt something twist in his chest. I have a sister, Catherine. We haven't spoken in 5 years. I said some terrible things when she married someone I didn't approve of. I thought I was protecting her, but really I was just controlling her. She told me she never wanted to see me again, and I let her go, too proud to apologize. Emma signed something else, more emphatically this time. Maria smiled. She says it's never too late to fix mistakes. She says you should call your sister out of the mouths of babes, Alexander murmured, or in this case, the hands of babes. He pulled out his phone, staring at his sister's contact information. 5 years. Would she even answer? There was only one way to find out. But before he could dial, Emma climbed onto his lap, a gesture so trusting and affectionate it made Alexander's heart ache. She pointed at her drawing, which she'd brought with her. It showed a stick figure in a wheelchair, another taller figure with long hair, and a small figure between them, holding both their hands. Above them, she'd drawn a sun with a smiley face. "Is that us?" Alexander asked, pointing at the figures. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Then she added something else to the drawing with her purple crayon. A fourth figure, also with long hair, standing beside the wheelchair. She pointed at it, then at Alexander's phone, then made a gesture of bringing people together. "Your sister," Maria whispered. "She's saying you should bring your family back together." Alexander looked at this child, this amazing, courageous, impossibly wise child, and wondered how he'd been lucky enough to have her in his life. She'd saved him from death, yes, but more than that, she was saving him from the death of his own humanity, the coldness, the isolation, the pride that had left him completely alone in a mansion full of expensive things and empty rooms. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, Emma, I'll call her." Emma clapped her hands silently, bouncing with joy in his lap. And as Alexander dialed the number he'd avoided for 5 years, he thought about how everything could change in a moment, how a conspiracy could be uncovered by a child, how a mute girl could speak louder than any voice, how sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places, in the smallest packages, with the biggest hearts. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, "Hello," his sister's voice, cautious and confused at seeing his name on her caller ID after so many years of silence. "Catherine," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's me. It's Alex. I need to tell you about someone I met, someone who reminded me what really matters, and I need to tell you I'm sorry. So very sorry." There was a long pause. Then, quietly, "I'm listening, Alex." Emma squeezed his hand encouragingly, and Alexander began to talk. About the accident, about his bitterness. About a little girl who refused to let him die even when he'd been cruel to her. About how sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to realize what you've already lost. About how it was time to come back to life. As he spoke, Emma leaned against his chest, her small heart beating steady and strong against his. Outside, the sun continued its journey across the sky, and inside, something new was beginning. Something that looked a lot like hope, something that felt like redemption. And in the corner of the room, almost invisible in the afternoon light, hung the portrait of Alexander's mother, a woman he'd lost to cancer 10 years ago. If he'd looked closely, he might have noticed that she was wearing a locket in the painting. A locket that contained a secret about Maria's family, a connection that would soon come to light and change everything they thought they knew. But that revelation was still waiting, hidden in the past, ready to transform the present in ways none of them could imagine. For now, this moment was enough. A man, a child, and the beginning of healing. And somewhere in heaven, if such places existed, perhaps Miguel Rodriguez and Alexander's mother were smiling down at the scene. 2 souls who had known love and loss, watching as their families found each other through the courage of a 6-year-old girl who refused to be silent in the face of injustice. The real journey was only beginning. 3 weeks had passed since the police arrested Nurse Patricia and Marcus Thornton. The conspiracy had unraveled faster than Alexander expected. Patricia, faced with overwhelming evidence including Emma's photographs, had confessed to everything. Thornton had promised her $2 million to slowly poison Alexander, forge power of attorney documents, and help transfer company assets to shell corporations he controlled. The plan had been months in the making, carefully orchestrated to look like a tragic decline following the accident. Now, on a crisp November morning, Alexander sat in his mansion's newly converted physical therapy room, working through exercises with his new therapist, James. Catherine, his sister, was visiting for the 3rd time since their reconciliation, sitting nearby with Emma while Maria prepared lunch in the kitchen. "You're getting stronger," James observed as Alexander completed a set of leg raises. "The real medication regimen, proper nutrition, and your improved mental state, it's making a real difference." Turns out not being poisoned helps with recovery," Alexander said dryly, then smiled to show he was joking. 3 weeks ago, he wouldn't have made that joke. 3 weeks ago, he wouldn't have smiled at all. Emma, who had been drawing at the table with the expensive art supplies Alexander had bought her, suddenly looked up sharply. Her eyes focused on something across the room, the portrait of Alexander's mother that he'd had moved to the therapy room. She stood up slowly, her small face intense with concentration. "Emma?" Catherine asked, noticing the change. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma walked toward the portrait, her steps measured and purposeful. She pointed at the painting, then at the locket barely visible in the image. Her hands began moving rapidly, urgently. "Catherine, can you get Maria?" Alexander asked, wheeling himself closer to Emma. "Something's wrong." Maria arrived within moments, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw Emma standing before the portrait, her face went pale. "Emma, what?" But Emma was already signing, her small hands trembling with emotion. Maria's expression shifted from confusion to shock, to something that looked like recognition and fear all at once. "Mr. Mercer," Maria said quietly, her voice shaking. "Emma says. She says she's seen that locket before, in a photograph of my mother." The room went silent except for the sound of traffic from the distant street. "That's impossible," Alexander said, but even as he spoke, something cold settled in his stomach. "This locket was unique. My mother had it custom made. It contained photos of her children, me and Catherine." "May I see the portrait more closely?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander nodded, and Maria approached the painting. She studied the locket for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through photos, finally stopping on one. She held it out to Alexander. The photograph showed an older woman, Maria's mother presumably, wearing an identical locket. The same intricate silver design, the same delicate chain, the same small sapphire accent on the clasp. "Where did your mother get this?" Alexander demanded, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them making sense. "She always said it was a gift," Maria whispered, "from a woman she worked for in New York, a woman who treated her like family, but she never told me the woman's name. She said it was complicated, that the woman's family wouldn't understand." Catherine stood up abruptly, her face white. "Alex, you don't think—" "I don't know what to think." Alexander's voice was tight. "When did your mother work in New York, Maria?" 1985 to 1990. She was a housekeeper for a wealthy family in Manhattan. She came back to Mexico pregnant with me in late 1990. Maria's eyes widened. "With me." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Alexander felt his world tilting on its axis. His mother, Elizabeth Mercer, had employed a housekeeper named— What was your mother's name? Rosa Santos. Alexander's breath caught. He looked at Catherine, whose hand was pressed against her mouth. "The locket," Catherine breathed. "Mother's locket. When she died, we couldn't find it." You said she probably wanted to be buried with it, so we didn't look further. She gave it to someone, Alexander said slowly. To Rosa Santos. Why would she do that unless... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the impossible thought forming in his mind. Emma tugged on his sleeve. When he looked down, she was holding her drawing, the one from weeks ago with the 4 stick figures. She pointed at the figure she'd added last, the one representing Catherine. Then she drew another figure beside Maria and connected them with a line to the figure representing Alexander and Catherine. The child understood before any of the adults wanted to admit it. Alex, Catherine said carefully, we need to find out the truth. If Mother had a relationship with Rosa Santos, if she gave her that locket, then Maria might be our sister, Alexander finished, the words feeling surreal even as he spoke them. Our half-sister. Maria sat down heavily in a nearby chair. No, that can't be. My mother never said anything about... Would she have? Alexander asked gently. If she was involved with a married woman from a wealthy family? In 1990? Maria, think about the timeline. Your mother left New York pregnant in late 1990. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1991. She always seemed sad after that, haunted by something. I thought it was just the illness. But what if it was guilt? What if she'd had to send away someone she loved to protect our family's reputation? This is insane, Maria whispered, but her eyes were filling with tears. My whole life, I wondered why my mother never talked about my father. She only said he was someone important who couldn't acknowledge me. I thought she meant a married man, maybe someone powerful who took advantage of her. But if it was your mother, if Elizabeth Mercer was... Different, Catherine finished softly. In a time when being different could destroy a family's reputation and business, Father would never have accepted it. He was traditional, conservative. If he'd found out Mother was in love with a woman, with the family housekeeper. Alexander remembered his father, stern, uncompromising, obsessed with the Mercer name and legacy. Yes, his father would have done anything to keep such a scandal quiet, including forcing Elizabeth to send Rosa away, breaking both their hearts in the process. We need proof, Alexander said, forcing himself to think logically even as his emotions churned. DNA test. It's the only way to know for certain. I'll do it, Maria said immediately. If there's even a chance that your mother, that Elizabeth was... Her voice broke. My mother cried every November 5th, every single year until she died. She never told me why. November 5th was Mother's birthday, Catherine whispered. Oh God, they loved each other. Emma climbed onto Maria's lap, wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck. The child's face was serious, mature beyond her years as she watched the adults grapple with a truth that had been hidden for over 3 decades. James, Alexander said to his therapist, who had been standing awkwardly in the corner, would you mind giving us some privacy? Of course, Mr. Mercer. I'll come back this afternoon. James left quickly, clearly relieved to escape the family drama. When he was gone, Alexander wheeled himself directly in front of Maria. If this is true, if you're my sister, everything changes, you understand that. I don't want anything from you, Maria said quickly, defensively. I have never asked for anything, never expected. That's not what I meant. Alexander's voice was firm but gentle. I meant that if you're my sister, then you're family, real family, not an employee, not someone I give charity to. Family, which means you have a right to know everything about our mother, about your mother, about the love they shared and the pain they suffered. Catherine knelt beside Maria's chair. It also means Emma is our niece, which we already knew in our hearts, didn't we? She smiled through tears at the little girl. This brave, brilliant little girl who saved Alex's life. Of course she's family, of course. Maria sobbed openly now, and Emma held her mother tighter, making soothing gestures with one hand while keeping the other arm wrapped around Maria's neck. Mr. Mercer, Maria began, Alexander or Alex, please. No more, Mr. Mercer. Alexander, Maria said, testing the name. If this is true, why did my mother never tell me? Why keep it secret even after your mother passed away? Shame, maybe, Catherine suggested. Or fear. Or maybe she was protecting you. If our father had known about you, he might have tried to. Make me disappear, Maria finished. Yes. My mother was always careful, always worried about deportation, even though she had proper papers. She was afraid of powerful people, afraid they would take me away. I never understood why, until now. Alexander thought about his father, dead now for 8 years. Had he known about Maria? Had he paid Rosa to disappear, to never reveal the truth? It would have been just like him, controlling, protective of the family reputation above all else. There are documents, Alexander said suddenly, in Mother's personal safe. After she died, Catherine and I agreed not to open it. She'd made us promise to wait until we were both married with families of our own. She said there were things we needed to understand about love and sacrifice before we'd be ready to read her letters. You never opened it? Catherine asked, even after all these years. I was never married, never even close, too busy building my empire to think about family. Alexander's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. And you, I pushed you away when you got married. I was so angry that you chose someone I didn't approve of. I never told you about Mother's request. Catherine's eyes flashed. You kept that from me. Alex, those letters might explain everything about Mother's sadness, about why she seemed so broken in her final years. I know, I'm sorry. I've been sorry about a lot of things lately. Alexander looked at Emma, who was watching him with those two wise eyes. Someone recently taught me that it's never too late to fix mistakes. Emma gave him a small, approving nod. The safe is in the library, Alexander continued. We need 2 keys to open it, one that Mother left with me, one with Catherine. We also need both of us to enter our birthdays as the combination. She designed it so we'd have to work together. Even from the grave, she was trying to keep us united, Catherine said softly. Oh, Mother, what secrets were you carrying? There's only one way to find out, Alexander said. Maria, this affects you more than anyone. Do you want to wait for the DNA results? Or do you want to open the safe now? Maria looked at Emma, who signed something quickly. Maria smiled through her tears. Emma says we should open it now. She says secrets hurt people, and it's time for the truth. Smart kid, Catherine said, ruffling Emma's hair. Okay, let's do this. The 4 of them, soon to be revealed as 3 adults and 1 child, all connected by blood and circumstance, made their way to the library. It was a magnificent room, 2 stories tall, with a rolling ladder and thousands of leather-bound books that Alexander had bought for show but rarely read. In the corner, behind a painting of the Connecticut coast, was the wall safe. Alexander and Catherine worked together, inserting their keys and entering their birthdays. The safe clicked open with a sound that seemed far too quiet for such a momentous occasion. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes. The first was addressed to Alexander and Catherine. The second, to my other daughter. The third simply said, the whole truth. Maria gasped when she saw the second envelope. She knew. Your mother knew about me. Of course she did, Catherine whispered. She carried you. She loved your mother. How could she not know? With shaking hands, Alexander removed all 3 envelopes. He handed the second one to Maria. This is yours. But maybe we should read them together, all 3? Maria nodded, unable to speak. Emma squeezed her mother's hand encouragingly. They settled in the library's reading area, Alexander in his wheelchair, Catherine on the sofa, Maria in the armchair with Emma on her lap. For a moment, no one moved. They simply sat there, 3 adults and 1 child on the precipice of truth. Together, Catherine said finally. On 3. 1, 2, 3. 3 envelopes opened simultaneously, 3 letters unfolded. and 3 voices began to read aloud, with Emma following along as best she could, their words weaving together into a story of forbidden love, impossible choices, and a secret that had shaped all their lives. "My dearest Alexander and Catherine," Alexander read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and I hope you have found peace with my passing. But more than that, I hope you have found each other again, found the love between siblings that I tried so hard to nurture in you both." Catherine's voice joined in reading from her copy. "There is something you must know, something I have carried in my heart like a stone for decades. I was not the woman you thought I was. I was not the perfect wife and mother the world believed me to be. I was a woman who loved deeply, impossibly, and against all the rules of the world I inhabited." Maria's hands trembled as she read from her letter. "My beautiful daughter, and you are my daughter, though I could never claim you publicly, never hold you as my own. Your mother Rosa was the love of my life, the one person who saw me completely and loved me anyway. When I held you as an infant, before we had to say goodbye, I memorized every detail of your face. I have carried you in my heart every day since." Emma's eyes were wide as she listened, her small hand pressed against her mother's heart as if she could feel it breaking and wanted to hold the pieces together. Alexander continued, "Rosa came to work for us in 1985. She was young, beautiful, and kind in ways I had forgotten existed. Your father had become cold and distant, obsessed with business and legacy. He saw me as an ornament, a vehicle for producing heirs and hosting dinner parties. But Rosa saw me as Elizabeth, just Elizabeth." "We tried to resist," Catherine read, tears streaming down her face. "We knew it was impossible, but love doesn't care about impossible. For 5 years, we found moments together, stolen hours when your father traveled, quiet conversations in the kitchen after the household slept, glances that said everything words could not. She taught me Spanish phrases. I taught her to read music. We created a world within the world, a place where we could simply be ourselves." Maria's voice broke as she read, "When I learned I was pregnant with you, we were terrified and joyful in equal measure. Your father, my husband, had been away for months on business. He would know immediately that you weren't his. But Rosa and I dared to dream. We talked about running away together, starting over somewhere no one knew us. We imagined a life where we could be a family. But your father discovered the truth," Alexander read, his voice hardening with anger at a dead man. "Not about Rosa, not about our love. He never suspected that. But he saw the pregnancy and knew the timing made it impossible for him to be the father. He assumed an affair with a man, some society scandal waiting to happen. He demanded Rosa leave immediately. He threatened her with deportation, with criminal charges, with anything he could think of to make her disappear." Catherine wiped her eyes. "I had to choose. My other children, or this new life growing inside me. Rosa begged me to leave with her, but I was a coward. I thought about you, Alexander and Catherine, so young and vulnerable. I thought about the scandal, the shame, the destruction of everything. I chose the life I knew over the life I wanted." "Rosa left in November 1990, Maria read through sobs. "Your mother, my mother, gave her money, documents, and the locket she wore every day. She made Rosa promise to name you Maria, after her own grandmother. She made her promise to love you enough for both of them. And she made her promise never to tell you the truth, to protect you from a family that might try to harm you or take you away." Emma signed something urgently. Maria nodded and translated for the others. "Emma wants to know if that's why her grandmother was sad, why she cried on November 5th every year." "Yes, baby," Maria whispered. "She was crying for the woman she loved, for the life they couldn't have together." Alexander continued reading. I have lived with this pain every day since. I watch you both grow. You, Alexander, so brilliant and driven, becoming just like your father in ways that break my heart. And you, Catherine, so full of love and dreams, fighting against the constraints of our world. I wonder constantly about my third child, growing up without me, without her siblings, without knowing her true heritage. The cancer came in 1991, Catherine read. Part of me wondered if it was punishment, if the universe was balancing the scales for my cowardice. But mostly I was grateful it gave me time to plan, to leave these letters, to create a safe that would one day bring my children together. Because you are all my children, and you deserve to know each other. Maria's letter concluded, Maria, my daughter, my beautiful girl I only held once. You have 2 siblings. They don't know about you yet, but I pray they will welcome you with open hearts. Tell them I'm sorry for the secrets. Tell them I love them all equally, impossibly, completely. Tell them that love is worth any risk, any sacrifice, any pain. And tell them to take care of each other, because family, real family, is the only thing that matters in the end. With all my love, Elizabeth Mercer. Written June 12, 2015, 3 months before my death. The library fell silent except for the sound of crying. All 3 adults wept, for Elizabeth, for Rosa, for the love that society had deemed impossible, for the family that had been fractured by fear and prejudice. Emma climbed off her mother's lap and went to Alexander, then to Catherine, hugging each of them in turn. Then she took all 3 of their hands and pulled them together, making them form a circle connected. She's right, Alexander said roughly, his voice thick with emotion. Emma's right. Mother wanted us together. She knew that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. And she trusted us to be better than our father, better than the world that forced her to hide. I have a sister, Catherine said wonderingly, looking at Maria. Another sister. All this time you were here, working in this house, and I never knew. Mother must have been watching over us, guiding things so our paths would cross. When did you start working here, Maria? Alexander asked suddenly. You said 8 years ago, but what month? November, Maria said slowly. November 5th. I saw the job posting and something made me apply. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but now... November 5th, Catherine breathed. Mother's birthday. The day Rosa cried every year. Maria, you started working here on the anniversary of your mother's separation from ours. That can't be chance. Maybe Rosa sent you here, Alexander suggested, subconsciously or intentionally, keeping you connected to your mother's memory. Or maybe Elizabeth was guiding things, even after death. I don't know. But you're here now, you're family, and we're not letting you go. They opened the 3rd envelope together, the one labeled, The Whole Truth. Inside was a single photograph and a brief note. The photograph showed Elizabeth and Rosa together, clearly taken in secret somewhere away from the mansion. They were holding infant Maria between them, both women looking at the baby with expressions of pure love and devastating sorrow. On the back, in Elizabeth's handwriting, the only photograph of my complete family. November 10th, 1990, 5 days before goodbye. The note read, To my children, all 3 of you, this is what love looks like. This is what I've fought for, even when I failed. Don't make my mistakes. Don't let fear or society or anyone else's judgment keep you from the people you love. Life is too short, and love is too rare. Take care of each other. Be brave where I was not. And know that I am watching over you all, forever proud, forever grateful that you found each other. Your mother, Elizabeth. Alexander stared at the photograph, seeing his mother's face radiating a joy he'd never witnessed in person. She looked young, alive, free in a way she never seemed in the mansion with his father. She was happy, he said softly. In this moment, she was truly happy. We have to tell people, Catherine said suddenly. About Maria, about her being our sister. Are you sure? Maria asked nervously. The scandal, the gossip, your business reputation, Alexander, your social standing, Catherine. If people know that Elizabeth Mercer had a child with her housekeeper, if they know she was in love, Alexander interrupted firmly. She was in love. And anyone who has a problem with that can go to hell. I've spent my whole life caring what other people think, building walls to protect the Mercer name and reputation. And look where it got me. Alone, bitter, nearly murdered by my own COO because I'd alienated everyone who might have warned me. No more walls, no more secrets. You're my sister, Maria. Emma is my niece. That's the truth, and I'm done hiding from the truth. But the company, Maria started, the company will survive. It survived my father's tyranny, my accident, Marcus Thornton's treachery. It'll survive me having a sister who worked as my housekeeper. Actually, it'll more than survive. Alexander's mind was already racing with possibilities. Maria, you've managed this household for 8 years. You've dealt with my terrible moods, coordinated staff, handled complex schedules, all while managing your own health issues and raising an exceptional daughter. That takes executive-level skills. How would you feel about joining Mercer Tech's management training program? What? Alexander, I never went to university. I barely finished high school. So, you're brilliant at organization, problem-solving, and managing difficult personalities, namely me. Those are skills you can't always teach. We'll get you the formal education if you want it, but experience matters too. Besides, he smiled, it's hard to fire family members. Believe me, I've tried with Catherine. Catherine laughed despite her tears. It's true. He's attempted to fire me from family dinners at least a dozen times. Emma signed something, her small face serious. Emma says, Maria translated, that Elizabeth would be happy, that she's watching and smiling. I think she's right, Catherine said softly. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens. You know what Mother loved most about these gardens? The wildflowers. Father always wanted them removed, wanted everything perfectly manicured and controlled. But Mother insisted on keeping a wild section, letting things grow naturally, unexpectedly. She said the most beautiful things in life were often the ones that grew outside the planned borders. Like love, Alexander said quietly, like family. Like a 6-year-old girl who refuses to let someone die even when they don't deserve saving. Emma walked over to him and climbed onto his lap, settling in as if she belonged there. And she did, Alexander realized. She belonged here just as much as he did. More maybe, because she'd earned her place through courage and compassion rather than simply being born into it. I need to say something, Maria announced, her voice stronger now. All my life I felt like I was missing something, like there was a piece of me I couldn't name. My mother loved me fiercely, but there was always sadness in her eyes, always this sense that we were running from something or someone. After she died, I felt so alone. Even with Emma, even with my husband Miguel, I felt like I was incomplete. She looked at Alexander and Catherine, fresh tears streaming down her face. But now I understand. I was missing my family, my siblings, my mother's other children, and Emma. Emma has been missing her aunt and uncle, her grandmother's legacy, the other half of who she is. She's not missing them anymore, Alexander said firmly. None of us are. We're together now, finally. Catherine returned from the window and knelt beside Maria's chair. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry Mother had to hide. I'm sorry Rosa had to leave. I'm sorry you grew up without knowing us. I'm sorry for all of it, but I'm so grateful that you're here now, that we found each other before it was too late. The two women embraced, and Emma scrambled to join the hug. Alexander wheeled closer, putting his arms around all of them, creating a circle of family that Elizabeth had dreamed of, but never lived to see. Outside, the November sun broke through clouds, sending golden light streaming through the library windows. And somewhere, In whatever place souls go after death, maybe Elizabeth and Rosa were watching. Maybe they were holding hands as they observed their children, all three of them finally united. Maybe they were crying tears of joy that their love, despite everything, had not been in vain. The family secret was out. The conspiracy that had nearly killed Alexander was resolved. But one revelation remained, one twist of fate that would bring everything full circle and prove that sometimes the universe has a plan more intricate than anyone could imagine. That revelation would come soon, triggered by Emma's brilliant mind and her habit of noticing details everyone else missed. But for now, in this moment, three siblings and one extraordinary child stood together in the light, holding on to each other and the miracle of their connection. The healing had begun. The truth had been spoken. And the real story, the one about what happened next, was only just beginning. 2 weeks after the revelation, on a cold December morning, the Mercer mansion was alive with activity. Not the sterile, quiet existence Alexander had maintained before, but real warmth. Maria cooking in the kitchen while Emma did homework at the counter, Catherine decorating a Christmas tree in the living room, Alexander working with his physical therapist and actually making progress, now that his body wasn't being slowly poisoned. The DNA results had arrived 3 days ago, confirming what they all already knew in their hearts. Maria was indeed Elizabeth's daughter, making her Alexander and Catherine's half-sister. The news had been shared with close family friends and business associates. There had been surprise, some whispered gossip, but mostly acceptance. Alexander had been right. The company survived. In fact, the story of how Emma had saved his life and brought their family together had generated positive press. Mercer Tech's stock had actually risen. But Emma had been quiet lately, withdrawn in a way that worried Maria. The little girl sat at the kitchen counter now, surrounded by homework she wasn't doing, staring instead at a photograph, the one from Elizabeth's safe, showing her with Rosa and baby Maria. "Emma, mi amor, what's wrong?" Maria asked, signing as she spoke. Emma pointed at the photograph, then at the calendar on the wall showing December. Her hands moved rapidly. "When is my birthday?" "March 23rd, baby, you know that. Why?" Emma's fingers spelled out dates and numbers, working through some calculation only she understood. Then her eyes widened and she jumped off her stool, running toward the library where Alexander was finishing his therapy session. Emma, wait!" Maria called, following her daughter. The little girl burst into the library, waving the photograph. Alexander stopped mid-exercise, concerned by Emma's agitation. Catherine, who had been helping organize books, turned from the ladder. "Emma, what is it?" Alexander asked gently. Emma's hands flew through signs, so fast Maria struggled to keep up translating. "The dates are wrong. November 1990, Maria born. March 1998, I born. But grandmother Rosa, when did she die?" "February 2020, Maria said slowly. "Why, Emma? What are you thinking?" Emma pulled out her small notebook, the one she had started carrying after solving the medication conspiracy. She'd taken to writing observations, drawing connections, becoming the little detective Alexander now affectionately called her. She showed them a page covered in dates and notes. "Rosa died February 2020, Emma's signs continued through Maria, "but she was sick longer. How long?" "About 2 years, Maria said, her voice catching. "She was diagnosed with heart failure in early 2018. She had limited time, but she fought hard to see you as long as possible." Emma wrote more numbers. Early 2018. "That's when bad things started happening to us. Papa's accident, money problems, moving to America, all at once." "Why?" Maria's face paled. "Emma, those things weren't connected. Your father's accident was just that, an accident. The money problems came from medical bills. Moving to America was because we needed better jobs." But Emma shook her head emphatically. She pointed at the photograph of Elizabeth and Rosa, then at dates in her notebook. Her small face was intense with concentration as her hands spelled out, "Grandmother Rosa knew she was dying. She knew Mama would need help. She knew about Elizabeth's children. She sent us here. Emma, that's—" Maria started, then stopped, because when she thought about it, really thought about it, the timing was suspicious. They'd moved to Connecticut specifically. Maria had seen a job posting for the Mercer Mansion that appeared in an online Mexican community board, a board her mother had also been part of. The posting had mentioned they needed someone who spoke Spanish and English, someone with housekeeping experience, someone who could start immediately. "My mother," Maria whispered. "She posted that job listing. Or she knew someone who did. She was making sure I would end up here with Elizabeth's other children before she died." Catherine descended the ladder quickly. "Are you saying Rosa orchestrated all of this?" "Not the accident," Alexander said, his mind racing through possibilities. "But maybe." "Emma, show me your notebook." Emma handed it over eagerly. Alexander studied her careful notes, her timeline of events. His eyes widened as he saw what she'd pieced together. "March 2017, he read aloud. "That's when I first posted that I was looking for a new housekeeper. My previous one retired. The posting went through a standard agency." He looked up sharply. "Maria, when did your mother's heart condition start showing symptoms?" The doctor said probably early 2017, though she wasn't diagnosed until 2018. "She knew she was dying," Alexander said softly. "Rosa knew, and she set things in motion to protect you. She couldn't tell you about Elizabeth directly. She'd promised not to. But she could guide you here, to Elizabeth's children, to family who could take care of you when she was gone. But Papa's accident," Maria protested. "Was a genuine accident," Catherine said gently. "But maybe Rosa saw it as an opportunity. A terrible, tragic opportunity, but one that would force you to leave Mexico to seek a new life elsewhere. And she made sure that elsewhere led you here." Emma signed again. Grandmother Rosa loved Grandmother Elizabeth, even after all those years. She wanted to bring the families together. She wanted us to know each other. "Us two women who loved each other across decades and borders," Alexander mused. "Two women who couldn't be together but still found a way to unite their families after death." "It's romantic," Catherine finished. "Tragic and beautiful and romantic." Maria sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "All this time I thought I was just surviving, just doing what I had to do for Emma. But my mother had a plan. She was protecting us, guiding us, even as she was dying. She was making sure you wouldn't be alone," Alexander said. "Making sure Emma would have family, real family, not just a struggling single mother working herself to death trying to pay medical bills." Emma climbed onto Maria's lap and signed. Both grandmothers were smart. Both loved their children. Both made plans to help us even after they died. "We're lucky." "So lucky," Maria agreed through tears. "Oh, Emma, you're right, baby. We're so lucky." Alexander wheeled himself closer to his sisters, both of them now, officially and emotionally. "Rosa and Elizabeth couldn't have their happy ending. Society, prejudice, fear, it all conspired against them. But they didn't let that bitterness destroy them. They kept loving, kept planning, kept hoping that someday their children would find each other. And we did," Catherine said, taking Maria's hand and Alexander's, "because of Emma. Because one little girl refused to let someone die, refused to be silent, refused to accept that things couldn't change." Emma blushed at the attention, but she signed something else. "Not just me. Mr. Mercer, Alexander. He chose to listen, finally. He chose to change. That's brave, too." "She's right," Maria said. "You didn't have to believe Emma. You didn't have to open the safe or acknowledge me as family. You chose to do those things. You chose to be different from your father, to honor your mother's real legacy instead of the one he tried to create." Alexander thought about his father. Cold, controlling, destroying his wife's chance at happiness to protect a reputation. And he thought about his mother, trapped, sacrificing love for duty, carrying her secret pain for decades. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, following in his father's footsteps without even realizing it, building walls of money and power that left him completely alone. "I was so lost," he said quietly. "After the accident, I thought my life was over, but really it was just beginning. Emma saved my life twice, once from poison and once from myself. She showed me what really matters." "What does matter?" Catherine asked softly. "This," Alexander said simply, gesturing at the three of them and Emma. "Family, love, connection. Being brave enough to let people in, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary." Emma signed rapidly. "The story isn't over. We still have work to do." "What work, sweetheart?" Maria asked. Emma pointed at her notebook again, at a section labeled "People Who Need Help." She'd written, "Other children like me, other families like ours. People who are different and scared." Alexander understood immediately. A foundation. We create a foundation in Elizabeth and Rosa's names. Support for LGBTQ families, for children with communication disabilities, for immigrants trying to build new lives. Turn mother's pain into something positive, Catherine added, her eyes shining. Give other families the happy endings she and Rosa couldn't have. "We have the resources," Alexander said, his mind already planning. "Mercer Tech is profitable again now that Thornton's embezzlement scheme has been exposed and the funds recovered. We can set up a significant endowment." Maria shook her head in wonder. "From housekeeping to philanthropy in 6 months. My mother wouldn't believe it." "She'd believe it," Alexander corrected. "She planned for it. She knew that once we found each other, we'd do something meaningful. She trusted us to honor their love." Emma signed one more thing. "When do we start?" "Today," Alexander said firmly. "Today, we start building something that matters. Today, we turn a tragedy into hope. Today, we make sure no one else has to hide their love or give up their children or pretend to be someone they're not just to survive." Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the winter garden. "It's starting to snow," she said softly. Mother loved the first snow of the season. She said it was like the world getting a fresh start. They all moved to the window, Alexander rolling his wheelchair close, Maria with Emma on her hip, Catherine standing beside them, and watched the snowflakes fall. White and pure and covering everything in beauty, transforming the world into something new. "A fresh start," Alexander repeated, "for all of us." Emma pointed at the sky and signed, "They're watching." Both grandmothers. They're happy. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe it was something more, but in that moment, Alexander could almost feel his mother's presence, could almost sense her approval, her joy at seeing her children finally united, her pride in what they were about to build from the ashes of her secret pain. "We're going to do right by them," he promised, speaking to the falling snow and the memories of 2 women who loved against all odds. "We're going to make your sacrifice mean something. We're going to change things so other families don't have to go through what you did." "Starting with Christmas," Maria said suddenly, smiling through tears. "Our first Christmas together. All of us, the family Elizabeth dreamed of." "Our first of many," Catherine agreed. And as snow continued to fall, covering the mansion grounds in white, the 4 of them stood together. 3 siblings reunited by fate, and the courage of one small girl, plus that girl herself, the hero who'd saved them all. They stood connected by blood and choice, by tragedy and triumph, by secrets revealed and futures beginning. 6 months ago, Alexander had been alone, bitter, slowly dying in a mansion full of expensive things and empty rooms. Now he stood surrounded by family, purpose, and something he'd thought he'd lost forever: hope. All because a 6-year-old girl refused to let him die. All because she'd been brave enough to keep trying, to keep warning, to keep caring, even when he'd given her no reason to care. All because Emma Rodriguez, born Maria Emma Rodriguez, carrying both her grandmother's names without knowing it, had a heart bigger than fear and a courage that changed everything. "Thank you," Alexander said to Emma, signing the words Maria had taught him. "Thank you for saving me, for saving all of us." Emma signed back, "That's what family does." And she was right. That's exactly what family does. Not the family you're born into always, but the family you choose, the family you fight for, the family you build from love and courage and refusal to give up on people who need saving. Outside, snow fell on the garden where Elizabeth had insisted on keeping wildflowers, on letting beautiful things grow outside the planned borders. Inside, her children, all 3 of them, and her granddaughter stood together in the light, proof that love, even hidden love, even forbidden love, could create something beautiful and lasting. The past was written, the present was here, and the future? The future was being built by 3 siblings and 1 extraordinary child, 1 foundation project at a time, 1 life saved at a time, 1 family supported at a time. Elizabeth and Rosa's love story had been cut short. But the story of what came after, the legacy they left, the family they created, the hope they inspired, that story was just beginning, and it was going to be beautiful.